Hello and welcome to PEP, which stands for Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance, where I talk to my guests about how they got a pep in their step. In other words, what's empowered them throughout their lives and how they have put a pep in other people's steps. And so what they have done to empower others. I'm joined today by Steve Tyson Jr. Steve is a musician, educator, and activist. He's the founder of Just Listen Entertainment, LLC, as you see in his background, which is a multimedia arts company that promotes critical thinking and freedom of artistic expression through hip hop culture. As a musician, performing under the name Ellect, he has earned over 1 million plays across digital streaming platforms and has performed at some of the world's legendary venues, including the Apollo Theater. Steve has also written and produced music for Star Talk Radio and was featured as a guest on Sway in the Morning, where he discussed his passion for hip hop culture and performed live on air. As an educator, Stephen has a strong passion for youth development, with over 20 years of experience in the field. He currently serves as program director for City Year in Philadelphia and is an adjunct professor at Arcadia University, where I'm also an alum, where he's earning his Ed.D. in educational leadership. All right, welcome to the program, Steve.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks for having me.
All right. So one of the things that I always try to start off with, because my coaching practice, as I said in the intro, we work through empowerment, and I really work on the 3 P's are my pillars, which are passion, purpose, and perseverance. And I know we're going to touch on all of those topics today, but I want to kick things off just by hearing about what sparked your passion for hip hop in the first place.
Absolutely. So a bit about myself. So I was born in the Bronx, New York, so same birthplace as hip hop culture. But I grew up predominantly in Pennsylvania. And so growing up in rural PA, both of my parents are educators, but yet I, didn't really feel like that much of a connection to, what was around me. And so, them also being New Yorkers had always expressed to me, this cultural connection that I had to New York. And my father being a teacher, a lot of his students, in addition to some of his experience when he was younger, but a lot of his students were also some of the early pioneers of hip hop culture. And so myself, growing up in a household of educators and folks who have, been proximate to the inception and birth of hip hop in their own experiences, as my parents were, it really instilled in me a passion for the culture in a way that differed from a lot of my friends, especially growing up in PA.
Okay, so it brought you back to the roots. And so what are some of the defining characteristics of hip hop culture that distinguish it from other sort of cultural and musical phenomenons?
Absolutely. So hip hop as a culture was established in 1973, and it founded on 4 principles of peace, unity, love, and having fun, as established by the Universal Zulu Nation. But those principles are expressed through DJing, rapping, breaking, and graffiti art. And so those elements have, in addition to a 5th element known as knowledge, have all been combined and labeled the foundation as to what hip hop culture is and how it's expressed.
Okay, when you talk about knowledge, is there a specific type of knowledge that tries to sort of ingrain in people?
It's more about the seeking of truth and the seeking of knowledge, whether it's knowledge and understanding of oneself or knowledge and understanding of others in the community or those in your social sphere. So, hip hop culture is really about connection and also how much of it stems into the broader roots of, various African cultures and just in building community, in the call and the response that you kind of hear in a lot of the music, but then also the necessity of call and response is that necessity to build connection and collaboration with others. So, as a kid growing up in Johnstown, and as a young Black man isolated in various ways, it was sort of liberating to feel that there was this culture and there was this opportunity for me to connect with other people around the world beyond just the people within my immediate family.
Got it. All right, so the passion was the music, the culture, and also the connection to the sort of broader community. Growing up in your context. Very cool. Yeah. So also in coaching, we focus a lot on language and language to understand concepts and experiences. And that's really important in the context of coaching. So I want to ask about a couple of sort of language questions as it revolves around your work. So the first one is your company called Just Listen. Where does that name come from? What's the background for that?
Absolutely. So I started Just Listen Entertainment in 2005 when I was in college, in undergrad, getting my bachelor's degree. And my friend David Dennis, he's also an MC. He lives out in Salt Lake City, Utah right now. But he's an MC, and MC, for those who might not be familiar, is another hip hop term for a rapper. But an MC is a master of ceremonies, or somebody who's moving the crowd. But we're both MCs or lyricists, and it being in college and finding our voices as young folks, we really felt that there was an opportunity for the world to just listen to us and to hear what we had to say. And so that became the name of the company, and it's still persisted and still been representative of the emotion and the intention behind it.
Right. From my understanding, it's a collective, so it's really about giving people the power to have that voice as being inherent also in the way that it's like the business is structured. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Awesome. And the name Ellect, where does that come from?
Yeah, so my rap name, Ellect, it's ELLECT. It's actually short for the intellect. So in 2017, I was in the studio, and I definitely have to shout out a filmmaker in Philadelphia, a local filmmaker named Tony Chenault. He's done a variety of different works with his company, Mike J Films. And he was also in the studio. I was working on a project at the time. And when I came out of the booth, he was like, "Yo, you're the intellect. Like that's your rap name. You gotta change everything. That's gotta be your name." And I dug it. I thought that was really cool. And so I hit up my other friend, Logic, who's another rapper, a little more prominently known. But he was like, "Yo, the intellect, that's a dope name. I'm going to call you Ellect, just like my homie Lenny called me Logic from Psychological." And so he shortened the intellect to Ellect. And I moved that and kind of, donned with that nickname. And then I moved forward with that ever since. So.
Okay. So it also it also connects to, like you said, about knowledge, but also the fact that there's a relationship for you, I think, between sort of your education, your role as an educator, and the music that you do.
Yeah, most definitely. Because even before I was a professor, or before I got into the world of youth development, most of the hip hop that I was a big fan of would be considered like conscious rap or backpack rap. A lot of the intellectual side of hip hop, artists like KRS-One, Nas, Chuck D and Public Enemy, folks like Talib Kweli, Mos Def, even, folks today like J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, Vic Mensa, et cetera. Folks who are really speaking on topics and using their platforms to not just represent who they are, but then also represent folks who might not have the voice or the opportunity or that platform to speak for themselves. So, yeah.
Well, I was raised in Chicago, Steve, so I'm going to throw in Common in that mix of
Most
people.
definitely.
All right. And lastly, intellectual property, which is that's your debut album, right?
Yeah, it's my first studio album. I've been, releasing a variety of different music under various monikers for years now. But as far as heading into the studio and taking a lot of the things that I've learned and absorbed after, studying various artists up close and personal, in addition to just my own work and development as an artist, intellectual property in this project is definitely the first official release under, Just Listen Entertainment LLC, in addition to under my moniker as Ellect.
Okay. And so where does intellectual property come from, like the name of the album, and what influenced that?
So it's an influence really because it's a direct homage, so to speak, to my path as not just an MC but also an educator, as you had mentioned before. But then also, as I was talking about, my immersement in rappers and artists who have that intellectual quality to their music and want to push people to think differently. And so this was my contribution to the greater intellectual property that's out there. But then also at the same time, it's purely my intellectual property. I wrote every song, I produced every song. It's something that is a full representation as an introduction of who I am at this moment.
Awesome. Yeah, and I asked that because that's sort of all of that stuff about language is really important, but also understanding how people come to their work and what moves them and motivates them. That's all kind of like an example of things that I would do with clients and helping them think through sort of their experiences.
Hmm.
And so part of that for me is helping people craft their story. And as a hip hop artist, you're a storyteller, right? So
Yeah.
what story, not just in this album, but in the years that you've been in doing music, what story or message are you trying to tell? Or another way of thinking about it, what conversation are you trying to push?
Hmm. I think the conversation that I'm trying to have, in addition to telling my story, is one that really just gets folks to think a bit differently about the subject matter that I'm focusing on, beyond just my experiences, and then how that can connect and relate to other folks who might feel isolated in their identity and whatever that identity is, in their own social atmosphere. Myself being young and black and in a vastly predominantly white, town growing up, and then even as I went into college, going to a predominantly white institution, and then going to grad school at another predominantly white institution, there's so much opportunity for isolationism. And so really being able to share the beginnings of my experiences to folks through this album, and then subsequently in future albums that I'll be putting out, is helpful in having those conversations, in addition to then touching on various things that are going on in the world with songs like Black Lives Matter, or songs, on my forthcoming project that addresses a lot more things that are happening socially in the world. I mean, the conversation that I'm trying to push are the variety of conversations that I feel need to be had in more spaces than just rhetoric, and that can then become actionable, that can turn into somebody feeling motivated and inspired to do something about anything, whatever whatever lights that fire for them. And so being a representative and an artist, and representing that through my artistry, is definitely an ambition of mine. But also just being an artist, just creating and being able to put something out is really the end game for me, because then what people choose to take from that or not take from it is up to the audience and those who are receiving it.
Okay, so and my sense was that a couple things going on. Part of what you hope people will take from it is maybe people who have felt in similar situations, that in contexts that you're coming from, and maybe get inspired and feel something from that. But I also heard you talk a little bit about things being actionable.
Mhm.
So for you, what is the relationship or the intersectionality between hip hop and maybe social justice or other other things that you're trying to push in the context that we find ourselves in?
Absolutely. So there's the musical aspect of it, that can kind of either create the background soundtrack or provide a bit of inspiration in songs of mine like BLM, referencing Black Lives Matter and the whole Black Lives Matter movement. But then there are also other stages and aspects of justice and entertainment that I'm putting into play as we speak. So hip hop is voting being one of those action arms. And so if folks are connected to hip hop and wondering, how can I be more actionable in getting people elected into office that can best represent myself or my community, or other folks who need to have their voices in spaces of power, then tapping into hip hop is voting, and seeing the information that's being presented out there and registering to vote through hip hop is voting and some of the other organizations that we've been affiliated with. So there are other ways of beyond just listening to music and then being left to your own devices. There are other actionable arms of justice and entertainment that folks can do for themselves. In addition to hip hop is voting, there's also various youth development workshops and education workshops just to learn about the history of hip hop culture, to learn about some of the pioneers, and then to learn how hip hop culture has influenced various social justice movements around the world, whether it's been, the Arab Spring movement that went off about 10 years ago or so, and how it helped to inspire a lot of that, or how it was prevalent and proximate to the Occupy Wall Street movement, or how it's been very relevant to what's going on in countries, like what's going on out in the Middle East, in various countries in the Middle East. And so there's so many different spaces and places in which hip hop resides, that there are opportunities for people to learn about and then create action steps that derive from those initial touch points.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I want to ask you specifically about the work that you've done with youth, both in the context of your hip hop work, but I guess sort of broadly in terms of the work that you do with youth. But I want to touch on one thing that you spoke about, which is, historically, I think historically that like a lot of social justice movements and movements politically in the United States and other places happen. A lot of it is energized by the youth.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of, back in the day in our, some of that music was rock and roll or whatever it was that was energizing different moments. What is there stuff that's being done to sort of get the older generation of hip hop people involved as well, not just reaching the sort of the roots of young people? What's being done to sort of get sort of the old heads involved?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and not a question that gets asked as much as it should. So I think whenever it comes to a lot of the pioneers of hip hop, or the folks who were connected and invested in a part of the culture in its early stages, there's definitely been a disconnect between the new school and the old school, so to speak. And there are several stages of old school, because I mean, even to artists like KRS-One, there were Melly Mel and other folks like that were old school to them. And so it's just like, so there are so many layers and levels to old school, but nonetheless, there's a serious disconnect. And this is something that's been an issue within hip hop as a mainstream culture, because you also have to think about the commercialization and the industry of hip hop as a separate entity to the culture of hip hop and like the heartbeat and the pulse of it, because the industry has helped to create that dichotomy between the younger generation and the older generation, where there is disdain on both ends about what the other is into or representing. And whenever there's opportunity, and I think that some of the space for that to kind of melt away and for there to be more of a harmony that I've noticed, the greatest spaces that's been happening thus far is within hip hop education and hip hop pedagogy, and in these spaces in academia, whether it's in K through 12 or it's in higher education, because not only do you have these various pioneers of hip hop, members of groups like the Spooks, or producers like Ninth Wonder, who are now college professors in various subjects in college, not just in music, or not just in sociology, or not just in any one specific field that you might connect with hip hop or entertainment, but language professors, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much opportunity for people to step into a classroom and be like, oh, my professor is the same person I was listening to, back in my dorm room, and that has helped to, again, melt away some of that that disconnection that's happened, which is very unfortunate, because we'll never, and no culture can ever accurately plan its next steps without knowing from where it came. Whether that's a culture or that's a person or that's anything, like you'll never really know where you're going until you know from whence you came. And that's also another African principle known as Sankofa. And so there are various opportunities to reconnect and reorient a younger generation to some of these older principles, while also getting folks in the older generation to reconnect and tap into that energy and that fearlessness that is certainly prevalent within the younger generation, because we've all had that within us, but at some point along the way, for a lot of folks, it ends up quieting down a bit. And then it becomes a bit of resentment in seeing other folks step into that fearlessness. And so making sure that, no matter what age and station you are in hip hop culture, you still have purpose and you still have power in your voice.
That's a really good summary. Thank you. When you talked about how important it is to understand your past, it's obviously something I do a lot in my coaching, and you referenced Sankofa and the importance of past and influencing. Mm-hmm. So I want to know about other things that you haven't already talked about that influence your life and your story. What would you say are some defining moments in shaping your life?
I'd say the most defining moments in my life have been all of the times where it felt as though I couldn't figure out my way into my next step. So if it was, as a kid, you know, first living in an isolated community like I lived, and then trying to find myself within that, and find, friends and community within that. But then also, taking it to the bigger picture of, other experiences that I've had in my life, that one might not tie into, identity and where you're going, as a person or as a professional or as, as you, however you see yourself. And so, there's been moments, whether it's been, in grad school where I lost everything in a fire, and, my entire apartment building had burned up. And, while I'm in the midst of trying to put together my master's thesis, and, having to start all over again and build that up, not just, working on a paper and doing that all over again, but to start all over again. The only material goods I had were the clothes on my back and the wallet and the car keys I had in my pocket when I had walked out of the apartment building. And so, that was definitely a defining moment that really helped me connect with an inner energy and a spirit that was like, it helped remind me that you can be unwavering despite whatever might come to you. And I know that there are going to be things in the future that will continue to test that faith in myself and the faith in my path. But there's been so many times where that has been tested before, and I didn't think that there was a feasible next step. And either the community and family and support system that I had around me helped me to see that next step, or I was able to eventually dig into myself enough to be able to look with greater awareness to find that next step for myself too. So yeah, there's been a lot of adversity and a lot of challenge, and I expect that there will continue to be for a long time, just because that's the ups and downs of life. But I'll always take each of those moments with grace and a sense of hope and opportunity, no matter how daunting they might be within the moment.
Yeah, so you're sort of getting to the sort of the third pillar of the things I work on in coaching, which is this concept of perseverance or resilience. And you talked about having a faith in yourself and being able to push through things and when things come up. Where do you think that faith and that sense of perseverance comes from you? Like where do you get that grit?
In my own experience, it's been through my family, and seeing the experiences that my parents have had, that my sister has had, that other members of my family have had, learning my, grandparents' stories of my cousins, aunts, and uncles, and the things that they've all gone through to get where they are. Hearing those things first as a kid, and learning that, you can have the opportunity to persevere no matter what may come your way. But then also as an adult, and seeing folks work through these things actively, and seeing myself live and work through things actively, it's only helped to better affirm that faith, so to speak. I mean, the easiest way to summarize it is that my very first tattoo was also the phrase "keep the faith." And I got it in a space where it was a defining moment in my life, where I didn't know what my next step was. I was leaving one job. I was planning on moving to a new state. I was ending a relationship and didn't know anything about what my next step was going to be. But I knew that if I had kept the faith within myself as to who I believe I am and what I believe that I can accomplish, that I would get to where I needed to be. And it's been working out thus far.
Yeah, do you think that like um do you think that like part of your success is due to those experiences and those tests, and that without those maybe you wouldn't have gotten to in the same place as where you are right now?
Absolutely. I mean, there is no success, and even there's no concept of success without either failure or opposition or challenge. So yeah, like without any of that, if the path had been easier, so to speak, I don't know if there would be as much appreciation for the
Mhm.
space in which I'm at. But then also, I don't know if there would be the motivation for where I still want to get to.
Okay. Yeah, and I think also those things humble us, right? And I know like from an organizational development sort of business perspective, there's a lot of work that has gone into the importance of like humble leadership and humble organizations and how that, and sometimes you need things to sort of kick you in the butt to remind you of that. So,
Yep.
um, so I know a lot of young people want to be, big time musicians, and etc. Um, but obviously not everybody can cut it. So what do you think is, I guess, what advice would you give to people who are interested in hip hop or other forms of art, and like things you would tell them about what it takes in perseverance and what, yeah, just from your experience, and what advice would you give to people um, about that? Because I mean, I'm sure it's as competitive as any other industry.
Absolutely. And I think that, it's a similar advice that I would give to anybody, regardless of any industry, is, to continue to study your craft and to know the nuances of your craft that best apply to how you operate. So there can be people who give you advice for anything, and their advice might not apply for you in how you operate and how you move. But if you're able to learn the totality of your craft, or as much of the totality of it as possible, you can then pick and choose the skill sets that you need to best leverage for the outcomes that you want. And I guess a less, heady or academic way of saying that is really just, put in the work and make sure that, there's always that phrase of like, you're putting in 10,000 hours. And once you get to that 10,000 hours, like there's some sort of mastery that you will have gotten to at that point. But for myself, I'd crossed that 10,000 hours mark years ago, and I still had years left of learning and relearning to even get to the point I'm at today. So even having that marker of 10,000 hours is irrelevant whenever either it's been fluff in those hours of work, or what you've been doing is kind of leading you down a narrower path and not opening you up to a broader understanding of whatever your craft might be. And so as a hip hop artist, and especially as somebody who's been navigating their way independently through the music and entertainment and academic fields,
Mm-hmm.
it definitely takes that third principle of yours as far as perseverance, because there is going to be a lot of people who tell you yes and you've got it and it's awesome and keep up the great work, and that's all they're going to give you. And and they're not going to give you additional support or resources or connections or opportunities, and that's fine. All they like, an applause is more than what should be expected, because at the end of the day, the expectation should come from oneself, for what you want out of it. And so for any aspiring hip hop artist or musician or anybody who's just interested in whatever their passion is, making sure that you're continually doing your best for yourself and not doing it for those applauses of others or for the acceptance of others, or even and not doing it in spite of the rejection of others, because there's also that phrase of I need more haters because they keep me motivated, and people are hating on me, that I'll have to prove them wrong, and I want to prove these people wrong and do all this. It's like, you don't need that negative energy thriving you, and you don't need to pour that into your tank too, because that might get you a certain distance, but it's the positivity, it's the love, it's the appreciation, it's the respect of your craft that'll get you to the end game long term. So
Yeah, and I think it's in some fields, I think that kind of thing gets lost, and people like chase the fame, or they chase the Instagram hits or whatever it is, and the cheerleaders and the fans. But that becomes the motivation. That actually could be more of a distraction, right?
yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to not just people who have sort of cheered you on, but have been more, not like passive in your life, but people who have really empowered you. Um, and you've talked a little bit about your family, but who else has really been empowering for you as a hip hop artist and as a person?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, without question, various members of my family, immediate and extended. But outside of that, I would have to say it's honestly been the artists that I've been listening to. and learning of their stories, learning of their ambition, and then seeing them maximize it. Whether it's been folks like KRS-One, who called himself the teacher early in his career and is definitely teaching and professing the history and roots and new ways of thinking about not just hip hop but also language in a really powerful and effective way. Or folks like Jay-Z. I mean, the first time I ever saw Jay-Z perform, or I ever saw him in existence, I was probably 11, 12 years old. And he was featured in a Foxy Brown video for her song I'll Be. And he had a suit on and glasses. And it was the first time I ever saw a rapper wear glasses and a suit in a video whenever he was rapping. And I was blown away, because here I was, this young Black kid who always got picked on for wearing glasses. And my parents always dressed me in like a polo or, something nicer, going to school when I was younger. And then I would get picked on a lot for that. And then here I am seeing Jay-Z do that, and then to see his evolution and growth to now being, the multifaceted businessman and musician that he is today. It's, inspired by folks like that, by folks like Nas, who, went from being this teenage kid telling his story, and that story being, his first album and being one of the greatest albums, not even just hip hop albums, but music albums of all time, in Illmatic, to seeing him then perform on stage at in Washington D.C. In front with a full live orchestra, and I think I believe it was the Kennedy Center. But it was fascinating, and seeing the growth and evolution of these artists that inspired me when I was younger. And so those are the folks who still empower me as an artist today, and give me the inspiration that it's not about the fame, and it's not about the clout, quote unquote, or the recognition. It's about representation of self and doing it for the broader respect and understanding of hip hop culture.
And it sounds, it's going to be cliche, but it sounds like part of it is about the journey and not so much the destination. And so I know that the work that you do with youth in terms of empowerment is also walking with them in their own journey. So can you just talk a little bit about sort of all the experiences that you've done with youth, and how that's evolved over time, and what you have seen in terms of success with some of the youth that you've interacted with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my first job working with youth, it was back in 2000, at the turn of the century. I started as a after-school counselor and summer camp counselor, and worked that job for 6 years. And while I was, in high school, and then back and forth whenever I was in undergrad, and it really helped. And not only was my sister one of the students in that program, so it really made it a lot easier. I think it was also a bit of convenience on my parents' sake to be like, "Oh, you can pick her up now after school and bring her home," as it being my first job. But it really helped me not just also understand my sister a bit better as a person, but then also connecting with kids in a way in which I missed. And I had mentors, so to speak, and people in my family that I looked to as mentors. But as far as in the community, there weren't that many people that I could look to for inspiration. And so making sure that I was that for these kids, once I saw that they were getting that out of me, I was like, wow, like I can't let them down. I can't, lead them astray, if they're asking me certain questions, I'm not trying to give them the information that might set them up for failure. And so that experience really led me into eventually, I took some years in between. I haven't been, consistently a, summer camp counselor, and then going into various other steps. There's various steps along the way. I ventured into the entertainment industry a bit, and was working for Russell Simmons briefly, and was also doing some work for some avant-garde jazz programs, and different event promotion in New York for a while. But what got me back into working with youth and youth development again was an opportunity with the Harlem Children's Zone. And once I got to connect and start tutoring those students who were transitioning into college, and then who were in college, it really made me recognize that there's a greater opportunity for me to help folks who, again, still need that support, or needed that guidance, or just needed that friend. Even though, there's parameters around my job and, like the certain roles of, client, things like that. At the end of the day, there were friendships that were also then built out of the care and the concern of where folks were at and how I could best get them to where they wanted to be. And so, so working at Harlem Children's Zone re-engaged me in the work that I had started back in 2000. And from there, it's just been a consistent growth and evolution since, with the Black Male Development Symposium here in Philadelphia, and now currently working at City Year Philadelphia, in addition to getting my doctorate in educational leadership. So yeah, it's been a process for sure. I mean, 21 years now, it definitely doesn't feel that long, but it's been definitely a process. But again, in hindsight, it's certainly been the right path.
Right. You use a phrase which is getting people from where they are to where they want to be, which is like so the definition of coaching. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about that. So hip hop is sort of an avenue for that, and that is, is that fair to say that you use hip hop as an avenue for pushing that, getting people where they are to where they want to be?
Yeah, if that's the avenue that's right for them.
Right.
And so, so a lot of my former students are definitely involved in hip hop, whether producers, MCs, breakers, graffiti artists, etc. And I've collaborated with them on some of their own projects, some of my previous projects. But a lot of my students aren't connected or interested in hip hop at all. But still are very interested in a lot of those principles of peace, unity, love, and having fun,
right.
Of, being able to find a way to express themselves in an authentic and connective way that reaches them out to other people, and other people get to see them for who they are. So there are ways to leverage the principles of hip hop or certain aspects and elements of hip hop, even if any of my former students or current students or anybody that I'm in connection with isn't necessarily aligned or identify with hip hop culture.
All right, and that's a segue to, I want to ask you a little bit about the work that you're doing in your doctorate. Because I know offline we spoke that you want to really embed those ideas and principles into school curriculum. So can you talk a little bit about just tell our viewers what that would look like, and what you would hope to achieve in that?
Absolutely. So I'm currently doing a policy analysis on third-party organizations and their ability to support schools within a district. Here is the city of Philadelphia, and so it's the Philadelphia School District. But making sure that there are opportunities, or identifying the opportunities for curricula like various hip hop pedagogies and other culturally relevant pedagogy and curricula to be implemented through various third-party organizations like City Year or others in a more robust way. Because in the experience that I've had in a very short tenure here at City Year, but then also in my time in the decade that I've worked and lived here in Philadelphia, it's definitely been something that has shown a lot of opportunity and promise. And so, wanting to make sure that at a policy level, there's space for that to show up in academia on behalf and for the students in the Philadelphia School District.
And and this goes back to the thing that's really important sort of across the board in education, which is representation, right? Mm-hmm. And you spoke earlier about how sort of the root of your passion for hip hop had to do with the fact that you're the only kid in town, right? When you were growing up. And then when you sort of went back to New York, you saw some more representation. What would be a hope in terms of hip hop, in terms of helping people and helping create sort of inclusive environments that that foster and are rooted in representation?
I think that it's, so through my workshops, there's opportunity for folks to express their voice. And so there's the elements of hip hop, so emceeing, DJing, breaking, and graffiti. If none of those interest you, but you're a poet, or you're a visual artist, or you're into dance, or or you're into making playlists on Spotify, whatever can somewhat connect to that element of hip hop, definitely connecting with folks and leveraging that and using that as an opportunity to highlight that individuality within them, so that they can use it as a platform to best express themselves.
All right, we're back. As you were. You're talking about how important it is for people to individually express themselves, even if, because I'm sure there are people that are love all those pillars and are very into that as like a
Mhm.
cultural understanding, but don't have the capacity to like rap or MC or DJ or any of those things, but there's still avenues
Absolutely.
for that.
Yeah, yeah. So again, if somebody's not as passionate about emceeing, breaking, DJing, graffiti, but yet they're a poet or they're a dancer or they're a visual artist, or even if they like making playlists on Spotify, there are still ways to connect to the elements of hip hop and to use those as an outlet for personal expression. Because in my experience, once a student or an individual in the classroom is able to feel like their full and authentic self, then they're more readily able to engage in the other material and other curricula that the teacher or the school is presenting to them.
Gotcha. Yeah. So in like coaching, we sort of use the word like niche, right? Helping employees and companies sort of find what it is that they do really well that's different from others, right?
Mm.
And in your context, again, I go back to Chicago because that's my context. I'm thinking of like when Lupe Fiasco came out and he was just like a nerdy kind of skateboarding. Somebody you wouldn't necessarily like think of as like a rapper, but like he owned that as like his context and his personality, and it
Yeah.
worked really well for him. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, one of hip hop's mantras is keeping it real, and so authenticity, regardless of who you are, is what's going to shine through.
awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to connect just on sort of a last sort of question. You alluded to the Harlem Children's Zone. I know
Mhm.
you also did work. I think it was an undergrad when you started Impact. And I know you've done work with fringe art as well. So I know we've talked a lot about hip hop and that work, but I just want to know in the examples of other things that you've done in your life, what would you like our viewers to know about parts of Stephen, your journey, your identity, just who you are that we haven't already touched on?
Mm. I guess it's that no matter which facet of myself you end up meeting me through, the other areas are going to show up. So a lot of people have met me through being an educator and then are surprised whenever they learn that I'm a rapper. Or some people meet me as a rapper and then are surprised that I'm also a producer and made all the music that I'm rapping over. And so there's various levels and layers to myself that might not appear as visibly on the surface. I mean, so folks like Lupe Fiasco you just mentioned, where he's showing up as himself, and folks might question, "Oh, you're a rapper, and you're this," because of whatever their perceptions or misperceptions might be, and I've experienced that as well. And so, I guess whenever it comes to myself or what I would want people to kind of know about me that hasn't already been talked about, I mean, there's a lot about me, and no matter which version or aspect of me that you end up coming across, the educator, the rapper, the producer, the photographer, the person, the friend, it's all still gonna be me, because they're all still representations of who I am, and the authenticity of me doesn't change regardless of the circumstance.
Okay. And so I do want to ask about the third thing because you talked about a lot of different things and there are different layers to you, but those things all sort of you mentioned lots of passions, right? You just mentioned photography, which was a new thing, a new fact for me, right? Can only find out so much from looking through your LinkedIn profile. Um, so so the third, like I mentioned, purpose as a connectivity, right? So even if you are trying to, and we purpose is sort of the northern light, right? Like you might have certain goals you're trying to achieve, but you get knocked off from that thing and you have to kind of bounce back, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where the perseverance comes in. And you might have a certain job you're looking for, or a certain career path, right? But all those things connect with sort of this overarching purpose, sort of your life's goal or your life's vision. So what
Mhm.
would you say if you're connecting all of those layers together? Would you say is like that's a big question. What would you say is your purpose?
I would say that my purpose is to inspire those who felt like they couldn't be their full selves to be able to be their full selves, especially young Black men.
Awesome. All right, and my throwaway question, not throwaway, but the question that I always just ask people that's not like scripted is just, is there anything I haven't asked you that you already want to talk about? Any questions or topics that are worth exploring for you?
Um, Really just, I mean, there's a lot to come this year, and even into 2022 and next year. But yeah, there's so much that I've been working and building on. Is going to be some workshops that are be unveiled throughout the remainder of this year. Some new music videos that'll be coming out. Showcasing so my album just recently dropped, and so yeah, showcasing a lot of the singles that are on that project. In addition to some new visuals and some new merchandise. Yeah, a lot of new things are definitely on deck and coming throughout the rest of 2021 and into next year in 22.
All right. Awesome.